PhD defense for the candidate Barbara Leavitt. I will give the first say to our president and CEO of Signum Magnum College and the chairperson of this meeting, Mr. Michael Schmelzer.
Thank you, Alexander. Hello, everyone. We are in different time zones, but from our end of the world, let me say good evening to everyone and welcome to the PhD defense of Barbara Leavitt. As Alexander said, my name is Michael Schmelzer. I'm the president of SMC, and I cannot be to be part of today's event as it marks a true milestone, not only for Barbara, who is our first ever PhD defense candidate, but also for SMC, as we are about to conclude a long journey. Today's event shall not reflect an examination or a test or any challenge, Barbara, so don't please be nervous at all. Today's event is a celebration. It's a celebration of outstanding academic work, of outstanding research, and commitment and persistence. Let me welcome the members of the Board of Examiners, Dr. W. James Weiss, Professor of Leadership at the School of Kinesiology, Faculty of Health Sciences, Western University in London, Ontario, Dr. Jovana Dikovic, Head of Sustainable Development and Inclusive Growth, and Professor of Research Methods, School of Management in Fribourg in Switzerland, and Dr. Alexander Novakovic, our Dean and Professor of Research Methods at Signum Magnum College. But now a very special welcome to Barbara Leavitt. And let me have a few words about Barbara. After completing an undergraduate degree in communications in 1982, Barbara started her career as a journalist with Canada's national news broadcaster. Barbara worked in leadership roles with various social justice initiatives, including disability and human rights in nonprofit organizations in various parts of Canada. Barbara holds a master's degree in organizational leadership and has been in public health for 18 years, developing into senior leadership roles in recent years. Barbara lives in Ontario, is married to an artist and mother of 2 children. Her daughter is also an artist and her son works in the film industry. In the past 30 years, Barbara has authored and co-authored several books. And now I want to give word to Barbara and stop talking too much, as this is your evening. Barbara, please, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much. And you just saved me a minute of my time telling a little bit about myself. So thank you so much for that. Yeah, and thanks, Mr. Schmelzer and members of the doctoral committee for this chance, and everybody who's joined in across multiple time zones and continents. I really would like to start by just expressing my deepest gratitude to my research advisors, Dr. Novakovic and Dr. Weiss, for their invaluable guidance, challenges, and support throughout this journey. And also to, as you can see from, our attendees, the many family and friends who provided support and encouragement along the way as well, especially my husband, Glenn Campbell, and our son, Campbell, and our daughter, Annalie. I would not be here today without you, so thank you. So, a little bit about me. I, just want to throw in that Ontario is, part of the most beautiful country in the world, Canada. And so here it is afternoon. So I want to tell you a little bit about what brought me here, I guess, is that, for probably the last decade or 15 years, I've been thinking a lot about systemic racism, sexism, ageism, and wondered how could a positive attribute become systemic, something like compassion. We know the negative impacts of negative biases have in our society and therefore in our workplaces. So really the root of my curiosity, it led me to want to do more research around that. There is so much suffering in the world, and in many countries, we spend over a third of our waking hours in workplaces. So there's no invisible door that you drop your suffering at when you enter a workplace. And so really interested in me is how can an organization provide, fantastic service and quality, when that work is done by workers who may be suffering. And so, there's a significant amount of research in for-profit businesses about compassion in the workplace. And, where compassion is present, there's a long list of benefits for individuals, for the organization, for the leaders themselves, including, employee engagement, better bottom lines, higher productivity, lower absenteeism rates. I mean, it's quite a long list. And so you wonder, why isn't everybody doing this? Like, given the benefits, what gets in the way? What helps this to flourish more in workplaces? And these are questions that scholars have been thinking about, particularly in the field of positive organizational scholarship, but also in compassion and leadership research as well. And I really just wanted to learn more about how compassion can be built in, sort of baked into the very system itself beyond, the influence of one good leader. So at this time, I won't go into a definition of compassion, but it's got complexities and nuances that also fueled my curiosity and certainly contributed to a deeper understanding of why it's not so easy all the time. So my study was designed to investigate the lived experience of senior leaders, CEOs, in what factors strengthen and what factors hinder the development and the sustainability of compassion in workplace systems. It contributes to research gaps in the field. Firstly, my study focuses on lived experience in nonprofit organizations, focuses on lived experience in how a unionized environment impacts the presence or not presence of compassion. And thirdly, it focuses on the lived experience of workplace systems beyond individual acts of compassion. So sort of the social architecture of the workplace. So it was clear to me that my research questions would be most suited for qualitative research. And there's lots of options within qualitative research, but I used hermeneutical phenomenology. And phenomenology is the study of lived experience, and it's both a philosophy and a methodology. And the goal is really to get at the essence of another human being's lived experience. It sort of is, asking not what the experience is, but what's the experience like for you. So my thinking certainly builds on existing literature and research, particularly in leadership, scholars who do leadership work, but they also illuminate some new findings and new ideas about the challenges and ideas that or opportunities that CEOs face, particularly in the context of not-for-profit and unionized environments. So my findings are organized into three essential themes. The first is organizational context does matter. Second, accountability and compassion together are key. And third, the leader is important. So those essential themes are really about the building of systemic compassion. Of course, all research has its limitations. A primary limitation of this study is that, findings are not generalizable or transferable to other phenomena or settings. The focus on in-depth lived experience limits the ability to draw broad, conclusions elsewhere in other phenomena. And secondly, well, also a strength, a limitation in the methodology and hermeneutical phenomenology is the dependence on the researcher in terms of interpretation of findings and analysis of findings. So, given all the benefits of workplace compassion to individuals, organizations, and leaders themselves, I think there's a lot of practical applications of these findings. First of all, leadership development in both academia and, the plethora of leadership development courses that are out there could include some focus on the value of and the impact of building and sustaining systemic compassion. One of the most exciting things to me is that compassion is a skill that can be taught. And so that's a really practical way for leaders to be able to use some of these findings. A second opportunity is with human resource specialists who, in terms of influencing organizational culture. A third might be with union leadership in terms of, how to build systemic compassion in the better outcomes that you can achieve, particularly in tension-oriented processes, which often are things like bargaining. And fourthly, nonprofit networks are an opportunity to increase the sharing of tools that help nonprofits. I mean, nonprofits have limited funding, and so sharing the tools such as policies that promote wellness and compassion, and low-cost staff recognition ideas. So there's also, as always, lots of possibilities for future research out of this. There's, I suggest, different methodologies like case studies. I think it'd be really interesting to follow a leader through, in depth, and follow an organization as a case study, a longitudinal study over change and shifting external factors. It'd be interesting to see what happens with systemic compassion, comparing larger organizations to smaller ones. And I've suggested compassion, has some opportunities for preemptive tools, preventing suffering before they happen, such as policy. So I think there's potential for lots of further research there. So I guess I really just want to say is this research matters. Like human beings, compassion is complex and nuanced, and it's hard. Compassion isn't just this motherhood issue that we should all be more compassionate. And in the context of a workplace setting, it's hard to do, and it requires really specific intention. So I think for me, most exciting is that it is doable. So thanks for the chance to sort of give a bit of an overview. And thanks everyone for your interest in being here today. And I look forward to learning, from your questions and as we move into that.
Thank you, Barb. I think that now we should have reports from our professors, examiners. Says by our cooperation, I am still your first supervisor. I will take this opportunity to start with my report, then Professor Wies will follow, and then at the end, Professor Dikovic. So before becoming Barbara's supervisor, I was involved previously in working with Barbara on her qualitative research courses. Later, I accepted eagerly and with great enthusiasm to support Barbara in the capacity of doctoral supervisor, because I already knew how well fit Barbara is for such an endeavor. However, when she proposed the topic, and it is the same topic that we now have as a completed study, I was a bit skeptical, although I can admit now I did not want to raise that issue too loudly. My philosophy regarding PhD research and generally scientific research is a Popperian one from philosopher Karl Popper. I think that only by fostering a bold hypothesis can we make a real breakthrough in science. Usually, this risk does not pay off. In the case of Barbara's thesis, I think it did pay off. So I doubted that organizations could systematically foster a culture of compassion, given the diverse characteristics and psychological traits of their members. And in my experience, only a small number of professionals in an organization demonstrate compassion. Furthermore, my thoughts were aligned with the mainstream understanding within organizational science, which highly stress or even elevate above everything else the role of leaders. To wit, only compassionate leaders can make the organization compassionate. That was the standard understanding of things. But Barbara threw the gauntlet at my face. She approached the topic from the positive organizational scholarship and showed that the standards perspective looking at the things must be changed if we want to build both thriving and effective organizations. We need not look at things from an accumulated depository of negative experiences, where we see only dysfunction, institutional deteriorations, distortions, incompetence, toxic human relationships, etc. But from a positive perspective as well. Also, we need to see that the compassion is an emergent pattern, as Barbara says, not easily controlled in a conventional top-down manner. The way we look at things determines how things are. Barbara's work represents a contribution within this school of thought, and I'm sure that many will follow Barbara's lead after the defense of this thesis. My strong conviction after reading the whole dissertation once again as a combined piece is that she successfully demonstrated that there is a possibility of building systematic compassion in organizations which are not only for profit, although she did the research only for nonprofit organizations. But looking from the positive organizational scholarship perspective was not an easy road. It assumes building the social architecture of an organization. Achieving the right organizational structure is a complex task, requiring a certain sort of relationships, a specific culture, and compassionate leadership. All these factors have to be developed in a certain ways to produce a synergic effect that will create systemic compassion. This study explores this by identifying 3 major themes from data collected through 17 in-depth semi-structured interviews with senior leaders of nonprofit organizations using Max von Manen's hermeneutic phenomenology approach. Each of the chapters of the dissertation brings specific contribution. The chapter dedicated to the literature review is a paradigmatic example of how the review should be conducted. I hope many students at our school will learn how to write literature reviews by reading Barbara's study. Most importantly, Barbara made a significant contribution to the definition of compassion at organizational level. Not only did she show that when speaking about compassion in organizations, we must refocus our attention from individual to collective plan, but she added additional element to the base definition of organizational compassion. The base definition is composed of the elements that Barbara combined in a single definition. Thanks to the study, we now know that the element of accountability is an integral part of the definition, besides elements such as detection of suffering, empathy for the sufferer, appraisal of the worthiness of compassion, and taking action to alleviate suffering. The chapter on methodology is rich and very well written. Although not trained in philosophy, Barbara competently dived into complex history of phenomenology as a philosophical school of thought that later became transformed as a research methodology within organizational science. She entered the field of theory of knowledge, ontology, and history of philosophy, without which is not possible to understand an interpretivist position, the worldview that she accepted and on which her study is founded. Barbara has managed to successfully implement a complex Max von Manen's methodology, showing that the hermeneutic phenomenology is a great research tool for revealing the hidden research treasures. Chapter 4 is the culmination of her research, which has yielded a wealth of data and verbatim quotations illustrating 3 major and subsequent ancillary themes. Thanks to this research, we are now able to see many nuances of organizational life related to the compassion that can shed new light on the topic. In particular, any leader who wants to have an lasting impact and build a culture of compassion is strongly encouraged to read this section. The study opened up a new avenues for further research. It confirmed an interesting and important intuition based on observation about the relationship between compassion at the organizational level and unionized environments. Barbara showed that the latter are not conducive to the systemic implementation of compassion in organizational life. This is not only an interesting but provocative finding that deserves a separate DBA study. Another provocative but unfortunately too short elaboration relates to Barbara's understanding of the relationship between compassion and capitalism. Namely, the competitive environment does not by default inhibit the development of compassion within the organization. This is another possible avenue for further and very attractive research. As announced in the opening chapters, Barbara has succeeded in filling the gap regarding the systematic integration of compassion into the organizational life of nonprofit organizations. We can now recognize her contributions as very important. As a supervisor, but also as a dean of Signum Magnum College, I am proud and excited. Barbara has proven that scientific writing can be both engaging and intellectually stimulating. She writes in a style that compels the reader to read the text page by page to the end, at the same pace and with the same interest, regardless of the complexity of the topic, whether she is discussing technical or philosophical elements or reviewing the literature. Finally, a supervisor's greatest reward is not only the student's accomplishments, but the relationship built along the way. True academic fulfillment includes the trust and friendship formed during this journey. Furthermore, the reward is sometimes something the supervisor receives and learns from a student. For me, this was not only a clear example of a truly positive and compassionate attitude that Barbara consistently demonstrated in working with Jim and me, but an opportunity to witness a very rare wonder and authentic interest in the subject matter itself. Thank you, Barbara, for all of that. So this was my report. I am giving now floor to Mr. James Wies.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Alex. And that was very comprehensive and very thorough. And you actually took some of my thunder as well. So I will just say that in many ways, I agree wholeheartedly with some of the comments that you have made. Barb, this is a message to you. I'm so proud of you and so happy to have been involved in this. I thank you for the invitation to be part of this committee. And I thank you for just being such a patient and excellent student in terms of going through this process, because we had some wonderful meetings along the way, and I can just see evidence of all the way along. I could see evidence of how you were integrating some of the feedback that Alex and I were giving you in this document. And I really enjoyed going through your document. I want to echo your comment about Chapter 2. Chapter 2 is exceptionally well written, in my view. It's written like a journalist wrote it, and a journalist did write it. I really enjoyed going through the literature. As we've talked in our meetings, there's been lots and lots of work done of late in the area of emotional intelligence. Leaders that pay attention to people, leaders that are self-aware and know how they're being received. They regulate themselves in terms of connecting with people, and they have genuine empathy for others. This is a break with how we once viewed leaders. We used to think leaders were on pedestals, the all-knowing, the almighty. And of course, that's not the case. We're now more in a participative governance. We're now more on emotional intelligence. The work that we've talked about, Brene Brown, Simon Sinek, and even some of my own work really highlights, I think, the importance of connecting with people and building relationships. And Barb, I thought that you did a very, very good job of that. We don't see compassion in the business and industry literature as much as we should, and perhaps your work and the work of others will allow us to do that. We do see stuff on emotional intelligence, and of late, I've been following the work of Amy Edmondson out of Harvard, who does some work on psychological safety. And I see lots of dots connecting between your work and some of the things that these people are suggesting are so important, not only to the experience of employees and people who come under a leader's influence, but to things like the bottom line, workplace attendance, commitment, motivation. All of those things are so vitally, vitally important. Barb, I read your document with great interest and pride, quite frankly. I'm going to give you a copy of mine. I've made a few little edits along the way that I hope you'll find helpful. in terms of some of your academic writing, but overall I was very, very pleased with it. And as mentioned, it aligns with some of the work that has really informed some of my work. I wondered about, and I enjoyed your presentation as well. And in fact, I think there are bits and pieces of your presentation that you could actually put into your document to make it stronger. I like, for instance, you did touch on external validity and who you can generalize this to and who you can't. I thought that you did a really good job of presenting it, and maybe you could just tighten up your document a little bit more with some areas there. I had some questions as I was going through your document about the internal validity of your document as well. You can see that my background from Jack Leavitt's research design classes of the past is shining through here. I hope that it is. But I'm sure your dad would ask you as well to just to speak a little bit more about the internal validity and the bias, and how you presented that so very, very well verbally. And then your comment on future research, I thought, was also very, very good. And perhaps we could highlight that a little bit more in your document. And I've made little notes as to where you can do that. With respect to your implications, I would add that search committees could really benefit from this work, because oftentimes search committees don't know what they're looking for. And sometimes they're looking for, and when they do think they know what they're looking for, they overlook the human element of leadership and how important it is. So let me conclude by saying I enjoyed your document. I think you're onto something that is so vitally, vitally important. The world, business and industry, and all organizations could use more compassion in their leaders, in my view. It builds on some of the fine work in emotional intelligence and leadership, but also, Barb, from our discussions, leaders help determine, set, and embed a desired culture for an organization. And in this day and age where organizations have more participative leadership, I think it is even more important that leaders develop a culture that helps support, encourage, and inspire people from a compassion perspective. So I really like what you've done, and I'll conclude by saying it was great to be involved in this process. It was great to witness your growth and development as a leader and scholar, actually, in this area. And I would encourage you to disseminate this far and wide, because there's lots of room for people to grow in this area. Alex, I'll turn things back to you.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you very much. I am giving now the floor to Professor Dikovic. Please, your microphone is, okay.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Barbara. I hope you are still a little bit nervous, but also very proud after all these very positive comments. I first of all have to have a little disclaimer. I'm not an expert in compassionate leadership. I landed on this topic, but I'm pretty much involved in different areas of qualitative research. So I think that my background might help you, and also the comments that I made in the text might perhaps also strengthen some points in the text which are overall perfectly written. And as my colleague said already, I would highly, highly recommend disseminating this work and advancing it into further book publication. So I will read my report. I hope you don't mind. So, dear colleagues, it is a great pleasure for me to be part of the board of examiners for the PhD thesis of our colleague, Ms. Barbara Leavitt. Ms. Leavitt's thesis, Systemic Compassion in Workplace Systems, a hermeneutic phenomenological study, focuses on exploring the lived experiences of leaders and their observations of what factors can enhance or hinder the systematic development of compassion in the workplace. The study is timely and relevant for a number of reasons. Although studies on compassionate leadership are not lacking, they are not well known in public discourse. Public opinion about compassionate leadership is often shaped by popular culture and films such as The Wolf of Wall Street or Greed, where it is clearly presented as an undesirable goal, a sign of weakness and low performance, or a feminine side of business to be avoided. Popular discourse has thus shaped the belief that the values of competition are divorced from the values of compassionate leadership. Ms. Leavitt's study challenged these arguments based on extensive qualitative research she conducted with 17 senior leaders in Canadian nonprofit organizations. The informants shared with Barbara their visions of compassion in the workplace and, more importantly, how it could systematically change the culture of leadership. The study shows that understanding compassion must go beyond individuals and their personal characteristics. It should be understood as a collective value and can be integrated into the workplace through a variety of approaches, supported by the right mix of organizational architecture, incentives, and the personal characteristics of managers. One of the barriers which Ms. Leavitt unexpectedly finds is union membership, which is often not conducive to the development of systemic compassion because of its constraining and controlling environment. Similarly, unstable funding for nonprofit organizations, which accelerates the attrition of trained staff, workplace demographics, compassion fatigue, and inappropriate staff behavior all take their toll and prevent compassionate leadership in the organization. Ms. Leavitt's contribution to this topic is twofold. The qualitative approach to the study of compassionate leadership is a grounded way of understanding how compassion emerges in the workplace and how it can be sustained. It follows the process dynamically with its ups and downs, and it allows researchers and participants to follow different paths to better understand the existing constraints and to adopt the solutions that work best for the organization. In other words, a qualitative approach to this subject enabled Ms. Leavitt to make pragmatic suggestions about how teams and organizations can create an environment for compassionate leadership. Ms. Leavitt's study can therefore serve as a valuable guide to organizational restructuring aimed at improving the team and work climate. Theoretically, this study contributes to the question of the importance of values and virtue ethics in the workplace from a different angle. While contemporary literature is often concerned with how business ethics can be instrumentalized to achieve better performance of companies and organizations, Ms. Leavitt takes a different approach. She argues that compassion and its systemic embedding is harder to achieve because its goals are long-term. Systemic compassion not only improves the working atmosphere and the performance of the organization in itself, but also extends its ideals to society, reinforcing its positive image and better serving the communities. Finally, Ms. Leavitt's well and unbiased writing, another important quality of this study, conveys an important message. Compassion is not a tool for a better performing organization, but the mindset for a healthier and more sustainable workplace and environment. Thank you, Barbara, very much for your fantastic work, and I hope we will hear more of it.
Thank you, Dr. Dikovic. Now we can officially open our discussion session. So I will ask our members of a committee to ask questions to our candidate. Maybe Jim, maybe you can start.
I would be happy to. Thank you.
Okay.
So Barb, I want you to think, I'll get into your area. I'm a reporter for our national newspaper, the Globe and Mail. I've heard about this study. Tell me in layman's terms what it's all about.
No comment? You never say that to a reporter. Yeah, thanks. This study is about the possibilities of reducing suffering of workers in a workplace through systemic approaches that go beyond the influence of one good leader. And so it looks at the strengtheners and hindrances, that what gets in the way, what helps, build it into systems so that whether a leader stays or not, systemic compassion can be present for what we know is a lot of suffering in humans.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Why is that important for organizations that perhaps are, follows up our last reviewer, but that are more profit driven? That do you think there might be some implications for those organizations?
Yeah, in fact, there is a plethora of research done in for-profit business of how compassion can be present. And again, I think a few of you mentioned the benefits. So the benefits are there. So the question really is then, why aren't for-profit businesses paying more attention to this? Because you get better bottom lines. The mention of capitalism, they are not mutually exclusive. So why does it matter? It matters because it matters to the welfare of the worker, but it certainly matters to the outcome and organization of themselves, the business themselves.
All stakeholders should be interested in that. Why aren't they interested in it? Do we have a demented view about what leadership is about? Is that the reason?
Well, it's actually, there's a few things that I referred to in the lit review about, some of the myths about compassionate leaders. So, and this is a bit gendered as well. Male leaders tend to see compassion as a weakness. And so, there's some gender issues there. So it's not seen as a, compassionate leadership was not always a separate style of leadership. It was complementary to authentic or transformational servant leadership. And so, I think it's emerging that it actually makes sense. And we have some world leaders who have certainly demonstrated that, former New Zealand leader and
Ardeen, absolutely. Yeah. Alex, can I keep going, or do you want me to just ask one question, or I can keep going? Okay. Barb, what would you do differently if you were to start this study over again?
I think one of the things, if I had time and resources, so if I had gone after some research grants and which would have allowed a little bit more, I would have expanded to include the lived experience of union leaders and workers themselves. I would have stayed in the nonprofit environment because that is where there is a gap in literature, but I think I would have expanded. The other, I will say, I met a couple CEOs that I thought, oh, this is a case study like this. We need to go deeper. And so I wouldn't have done it differently, but I will say that I would have considered, a case study methodology just because the richness there as well.
Yes. And I think this again could be captured under your future research section as well in terms of, what you could do differently. If you were to do that, you could look at then maybe leadership teams. You could actually do some analysis of the culture. You could look at things that change when leaders change to see whether or not there are differences. You could look at those bottom lines and other things if it was in a different industry. So there are a variety of things that you could do in this particular area.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks. I was going to say, when I suggested for future research a longitudinal study, that's exactly what I was thinking, that, that what, as the organization shifts and change, because workplaces do, what impacts, the sustaining of systemic compassion. And I love Edmondson's work around, team psychological safety. So there's a lot of links there, as you mentioned.
Very good. Very good. Barb, did you get the sense that anyone that you interviewed may have been giving you socially desirable content as opposed to what the actual truth is?
Yeah, thanks. I think that's such a good So I'm going to come at that two ways. One is as a hermeneutical phenomenologist, I did a lot of self-reflection to make sure I was going in with open ears and open heart and, taking Husserl's sort of natural attitude, experience the experience kind of approach. And so I didn't go in looking for that. The other thing was that I was very clear in my own approach that the scope of my study did not include, assigning a leadership style or evaluating whether they walk the walk, walk the talk. And so that would be a fantastic area of future research, which is why, had I had all the time and money in the world, I'd love to, have a more 360 view of that.
Yes, and you could go a little deeper if you would follow this case study approach. You could go a little deeper. It is interesting. I was once at a conference, and a fellow by the name of Marshall Goldsmith, who's done some marvelous work on leadership, but he also did lots of consulting, and he consulted with actually Gordon Gekko from the Michael Douglas character from the Wall Street. And Michael, when he interviewed him, he got the impression that Gekko thought that actually people really liked him, and he was really connecting with people until he interviewed with people, and that wasn't the case. So self-awareness is a really big part of all of this, for sure.
I just want to just building on that and that, self-awareness of emotional intelligence. But, it did surprise me, the forthcomingness of CEOs. It felt like they never get a chance to talk about this. Two in particular told me they are not compassionate individuals. They are not compassionate people, but they know enough to ensure that it exists in the leadership team. I thought that was pretty darn honest for a researcher talking about compassion.
And would these organizations be organizations that are actually governed by boards of directors as well, or advisory boards? Because it would be very important, I think, for them to get it as well, and to recognize and reward leaders that behave this way.
Yes, thanks for raising that. I do speak to it, in a few places that, yes, nonprofits in Canada must have boards of directors. And it's one of the reasons I wanted to do a couple provinces, because I just wanted to see whether some of those external structure differences might have any impact. But Canadian law requires nonprofits if they're registered, to have a board of directors, and they are key. And leaders identified them as key collaborators because they're governance boards. They're not operational boards, which means that they are responsible for policy, and that's a key piece.
Sure. So this question deals with external validity, and you covered it in your presentation exceptionally well, I thought. But a critic might look at your study and say, well, you have 17 leaders that you interviewed. Is there a chance that you could have interviewed 17 other people that thought exactly in a different way? How would you respond to that criticism?
Absolutely, that's true. By choosing 17, I did not choose tens of thousands. There's over 100,000 nonprofits in Canada. What I will say is that, as we know in qualitative research, we're rather than reliability and validity, we're really quite interested in trustworthiness, credibility, and transferability. So for credibility, I had three strategies. One was choosing a well-established methodology. The second was, using the excellent standards of qualitative research data collection in terms of the semi-structured interview format and those sorts of things. The third, around credibility, is really around the transparency of the bias of the researcher. I'm an instrument of the research, so I was very transparent about what my biases were and how I dealt with them prior to research. In terms of trustworthiness, again, Michael Patton, says trustworthiness is dependent on the trustworthiness of the researcher. So while in hermeneutical, I was not, going back to participants to check whether I got it right, because in fact, interpretive lens is that it's their interpretation, my interpretation, and you as a reader interpretation. And so I'm trusted as a researcher to capture trustworthiness holistically. And then just quickly, thirdly, the transferability, it isn't, transferable. However, I do want to say that, phenomenologists would argue that what is usable and possible around that is that another CEO in another scenario with a different life story would be able to read this and recognize the interpretations that I've analyzed and brought forward. It may not resonate with them as their experience, but they would recognize it.
And I think other researchers could actually read this document and be thinking about implementing it in other settings to see whether or not the findings come through there as well. The key, of course, is to get this disseminated. We have to get this beyond, your committee and the people who are on today. So, and that's what I think good research actually makes a difference in terms of getting it out and people can see that there are implications. If I may, Alex, what's your most surprising finding? When you reflect on this, what's your most surprising finding from this research?
Yeah, I think I had a couple. One was the complexity, and that many things were two sides of the same coin. A nonprofit, Dr. Deepikat, you mentioned this too. Two sides of the same coin. Limited funding, but the nonprofit sector draws workers who are already passionate about typically the cause, the social justice issue, or the mandate of the organization. That's great. Limited funding. And just to say how that links to systemic compassion is that builds a culture of shared values and, that helps create a space for compassion to flourish. But on the other side of the coin is they have limited funding. So there's a high turnover. And as you mentioned, the loss of organizational memory is really impactful on culture as well. You suddenly lose your sense of belonging and your shared values. So, so the complexity there, that was the first. The next surprising thing for me is just the power of the relationship between accountability and compassion. It's not a new concept, but I guess I was surprised at just how strongly those two were needed to be integrated, and the just how strongly that came out was a little bit surprising to me. And just a third piece, which I love, was the origin stories of CEOs. So I didn't ask, what's your origin story? I didn't ask, where did this come from? It was sort of light rapport building chatter, but it's just really struck me how almost every CEO could pinpoint, and many of these CEOs are in their 60s, could pinpoint a childhood event or experience or something that opened their eyes to whatever social justice or community orientation they had. And as we know, origin stories are critical to who we become as humans. So, and I just want to say that I carried the responsibility to honor that pretty deeply. I think in any lived experience interviewing, you're holding, with such integrity, the stories of other human beings.
Yeah. I'll conclude with this comment. Having worked with young people for 40 years, I do believe actually students have changed. And students seek far more from their work experience today than maybe they did a few years ago, where they wanted a job. They want fulfillment, they want engagement, they want to be part of something. I see it in at the university, and I also following alumni as well. I believe your research actually contributes so much to the potential long-term success, survival, engagement of young colleagues who demand this. Your thoughts?
Thank you. I think that that's another double-edged sword for a lot of CEOs where, because the newer generations want fulfillment from work, they're not always, they really value work-life balance, which means they're not always willing to work evenings and weekends, which many nonprofits, that's when their service is provided. And so the difficulty with that is not just finding workers, it's that the older workers in a workplace all of a sudden get this sense of unfairness that the newer workers aren't working Saturday nights, and what that means is it makes it harder in the culture for compassion to flourish. So
yeah, thank you, Barb. Alec, I'm going to leave it there. I've got some other questions that we can come back to later, but I'll give others a chance. Barb, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim, very much for this set of questions. Dr. Dikovic, maybe you can pose some questions.
Yes, I can. First of all, I just would like to follow up Jim's observation about certain parts of the dissertation. Because I'm economic anthropologist by vocation, my favorite part in your thesis was exactly about the origin for the compassion. So I found it to be very ethnographically very well explored, and also very gently and gracefully integrated into the text. So sometimes, depending on different writing styles, this chapter, or actually subchapter within the chapter 5, could have been sort of artificial addition to the chapter, but because of your writing style and because of the gracefulness of your writing, I think it just fit perfectly, and it just really enlightened the ideas and perspectives of the leadership and the rationales why they choose to do what they do, why they choose that kind of organizations, and how they eventually can transmit their values in the workplace. So I really like that very much. I also liked very much the second chapter, the book review, the literature review part. I think it was excellently written. And I also have a few of the comments, but we can discuss this later on. Now I would focus on my major questions. So now when you have the distance from your dissertation, did you come up with some additional observations or findings which are relevant, but because of the finished work on dissertation came up later, came up post festum? And if you have such, would you be willing to share it with us?
Thank you. I actually did, but it was more about feeling that, I should have fleshed that out more, or I should have brought that to light more. And so one example would be, I don't know that I covered well enough that I think one of the newer concepts I'm bringing to this is the idea of preemptive compassion.
Yeah.
And so that is something I think I might have spent a bit more time on in reflection, because I think it is newer, and as Dr. Novkovic said, I actually feel it adds a nuance to the definition of compassion in the context of a workplace setting. So that would be one for sure. That's such a neat question. Now I'm going to think of 5 things tonight at 3 a.m. So.
And also about the definition of compassion, would you change it a little bit, or you would still keep it with the definition that you provided in the dissertation?
Yeah, I actually love this. It was almost one of my favorite parts was really exploring the definition of compassion, because there wasn't necessarily lots of agreement across disciplines, and because of the nuance piece. And I would absolutely stay with the definition that I had, because it is rooted in positive organizational scholarship, and I really wanted to stay within the framework that I was using in terms of the bases. What delights me is that I feel I can contribute to some of the nuances of that in particular settings like nonprofit, workplace settings. So,
thank you very much, Barbara. And I will focus on a little bit more critical side of the study. In one part of the text, you say that people working in the organization with compassionate leadership might not be satisfied with the level of compassion and eventually might ask for more compassion. But before that, I think it was a little bit missing point in the text. We actually did not hear from you what would be the minimal level of the compassion and how it would look like, so that we know what it means really when co-workers are asking for more. So what kind of contribution that would be for the organization and also for the whole working environment. So my question would be how you would define the minimal level of compassion at the workplace, and what would be, let's say, more compassion at the workplace.
Yeah, thanks. It was outside my scope to decide whether this was a compassionate workplace or not, but I love that question, and it gets me thinking lots because, one of the things that is emerging in literature now is how the receiver of compassion receives it. So when we ask the question, what's enough? Well, depends on how the receiver defines that. And so there's some emerging research around that right now, that wait a minute, we think we're all being all compassionate, but if it's not being received as that, it's actually being received as just another form of domination of a leader. Then is it compassion? Even though some of the traditional things we would consider compassion. This is what I love about it, is that it is so nuanced. The definition is, as you said, notice suffering, feel some empathetic, and a third element that of wanting to take action to relieve the suffering. Those three elements of the definition are fairly widely accepted. But the fourth element, which gets at, I think, what partly what we're talking about right now, is this idea of assessing whether the person's worthy of my compassion. Mm-hmm. So what is enough? And it gets pretty tricky because we're also more likely to be compassionate with people who look like ourselves or from our same sociodemographic, backgrounds. And if I have compassion fatigue, I'm less likely to be able to, So again, I think I'm walking around your question. In other words, it wasn't part of my study to assess a level of compassion, but I love it as a future research idea.
That would be fantastic.
Yeah.
Thanks, Barbara. And so if I may, Alexander, I also have two more questions. Is that okay?
Please.
Mm-hmm. So this is also a little bit critical question. Compassionate leadership clearly provides many benefits, not only for the company, but also for the employees. And of course, it creates a better working atmosphere. But have you thought of or discussed with your interlocutors in what situations compassion or compassionate leadership would not be a good choice, a good solution, and why?
Yeah, thanks. I explored a couple things with the leaders around, that wasn't the direct question. The questions that might get at that a bit were things like, can compassion be taken advantage of? Have you had that experience? And so there was a resounding yes, that compassion can be taken advantage of in a workplace. And so that's where the accountability piece comes in. So I feel I'm not really directly answering your question, but just to say, I think that's yet another, area of to explore further for us to understand more about this.
Absolutely. And the last question, given the nature of the organizations you observed, I would like to know how the decision among some of the leaders not to join the unions actually were made. Did the CEO exclusively made the decision to not join the unions? And how, or the co-workers brought this decision together? And most importantly, how that decision of the CEO not to join, in case if that was his decision or her decision, how that decision impacted the perception of others about his compassionate leadership.
Yeah, thanks. The unionization in Canada anyway is driven by the workers. And so in fact, in nonprofits in Canada, they mirror business in terms of the number of unionized environments, but it is driven by the workers, not by the CEO. So, my finding really shows that there's, that none of the participants said that a union contract is a tool for systemic compassion, but most said, I got to find ways around it if I want to be if we want compassion. So, there was, if I had interviewed unionized members, they may totally disagree and say it's a great tool. Obviously, that's the benefit of, other perspectives and other lived experience. But in this particular study, no CEO makes a decision whether there's a union or not. It is the workers' right to form a union or not.
Thanks a lot, Barbara.
Okay, Barb.
I will stop
finally,
here
yeah.
because I think the supervisor is also
I'm
eagerly waiting to ask some questions.
Yeah, I have only 4 questions. 2 are from the methodology part, and the rest of them are related to the subject matter of your study. So on page 63, you stated, drawing on Lincoln and Guba, I strongly believe that the world is a subjective and socially constructed, and individuals' truth is personal to them. I also recognize the objective truths that do exist. We have an overwhelming amount of evidence that anyone, no matter where they are from or what culture they are from, would probably fall from a tall building if they jumped. So when describing the world as subjective and socially constructed, what is the status of truth? How can subjective perceptions and interpretations that may conflict with each other hold scientific merit? How can something that is not quantifiable be considered objective?
Yeah, well, I think you've asked or you've pinpointed, qualitative research took a long time to get valued, right? Because if it can't be measured as in quantitative research, it can't be scientific or valid. And that's why, qualitative research uses credibility and, trustworthiness. But I think, from a personal perspective, my ontological view is interpretivist. And of course, I accept that there are some objective truths like gravity. So how can we, the real question to me from any research is how can we learn from this to be better, do better, or learn more? And I think that's, the contribution of hermeneutical phenomenology, because we cannot transfer these findings to every other nonprofit workplace in Canada. So I'm not sure that speaks to that.
What do you think is the objectivity component of the subjectivist approach, I would say? What is the objectivity when you interviewed your interlocutors, for example, let's say 10 of them, and then the other person interviewed them and implement the same methodology? Would they reach to the same conclusion? Would they see the same things? Would they detect the same essences as in phenomenological research? If we say yes, then we have objectivity, I would say. What do you think?
Well, I want to say yes, but what I really believe is that, as an interpretivist, we're constantly interpreting all aspects of the world around us at all times. However, I do believe that, the essential essences that came out of this study would be recognized by another even descriptive phenomenologist. So yes. But
And that's
I struggle to call it an objective truth, because even if I went back to the interlocutor, the participants, they might disagree with themselves a day later, you know.
That's a very good answer, and thank you, Barb. You mentioned on page 85 that Max von Manen's hermeneutic phenomenology lacks clear implementation guidelines. Yet you described how you use his 6-step instructions for your data analysis. What do you see as the main difference between phenomenological interviewing and regular qualitative interviewing, e.g., for case studies, ethnography, journalism? How specifically did Van Manen's methodology impact your research approach?
Yeah, it was fundamental because it aligns with my worldview. And that the difference to me was in the interview. Well, I haven't done descriptive phenomenology or case studies, but the difference for me is that you're listening for the meaning under the words, the essence, whereas perhaps descriptive phenomenology, you're listening for what they're saying, and then you're theming that. I'm listening, and this was some of the hardest parts for me was, well, it was the hardest part, was going over and over and over the transcripts and the audio files, listening for the silences, rereading my observation notes, and really trying to get at the essence underneath. So, for example, a leader might have described a compassionate act in a workplace and was smiling, and I could interpret that as, they're proud of their compassion in the workplace, they value it. But I might also ask, why are you smiling when you tell that story? So another researcher might take the story, and not I, but phenomenologists and hermeneutical phenomenologists would look for, why aren't you smiling? Why are you smiling as you tell that story? Because it's that experience.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Barb. So it's very complex approach, and this bracketing strategy is very, very demanding, I would say. So I will turn to last questions. You concluded that compassion is a teachable skill. How does this apply to individuals who lack empathy and compassion within organization? Could this hinder the implementation of systemic compassion? Maybe they can be learned to imitate compassion. But do we need compassionate robots, let's say, or at workplace? Is this why compassionate training hasn't been widely adopted beyond leadership roles?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. What we know, I just to clarify, I didn't conclude it's a teachable skill. The literature shows that it is, we can induce empathy, and it is a teachable skill. One of the conclusions I have, or findings that I did have, was that it does take intention. And it's actually one of the reasons I chose my criteria the way I did. I chose organizations that already had an orientation or some leaning towards caring and compassion. And so I don't know how that would translate if I was working with trying to work with an organization that or a leader that had no interest in compassion. But I do think that there's some, we need to make those links. We need to find out what are their barriers to understanding the value of compassion and other positive attributes in a healthy workplace. So, again, not sure I'm directly answering it other than to say it's possible, because it is, there's lots of argument about whether compassion is a virtue, an emotion, a skill. It is all of those. And the skill is a teachable aspect of it by empathy-inducing practices.
So at least we should be compassionate to uncompassionate as colleagues, let's say, in a compassionate organization, in a way. Is that one of the attitudes that we should have?
Absolutely. And positive organizational scholarship, Warline and Dutton, in their work around awakening compassion in the workplace, that is a specific thing. They talk about, I think they phrase it as the space of graciousness or something, like giving people some space to to be good. And also, yes, we need to be compassionate towards those who are not. We're just compounding suffering without that.
Thank you.
I mean,
Thank
that's
you,
just
Barb.
now I'm just off on my own personal stuff, but in terms of the data, what the data shows, is how valuable that is.
And the final one, you noted that the implementation of systemic compassion in unionized settings is challenging but possible. How do you think this can be achieved? Alternatively, would such implementation harm the mission of unions and diminish the role of unions as such? This question is overlapping a bit with Dr. Dikovic, but I think it's interesting to,
Yeah, I think it would enhance their effectiveness with their members. I mean, the basic fundamental problem is that an organization has two accountabilities. One is the service it provides and the well-being of its workers. A union has one accountability, it's the well-being of the workers. And sometimes that causes tensions. It doesn't mean it's not possible to figure it out. A great mitigator is a good relationship between the union and management. So, it's definitely not definitive that it's not possible. It's very hard for, the CEOs talked lots about it was really hard to be responsive to individual staff when the collective agreement didn't allow for it, because it allows for equal treatment, and CEOs were interested in equitable treatment, what it is individual staff need, not just what is allowed within the contract.
Yeah. Thank you, Barb. I think that we have completed the first round of questions. Are there other maybe quick, short questions?
I have a comment and a question. Barb, you did respond to this, and I like the way you did respond. There are compassionate leaders do run the risk of some people taking advantage of them. I would argue, and I've seen this in my own experience and in my consulting work as well, a very small percentage of people are in that area. You will get so much more out of others in terms of commitment. And again, you can change the culture by being this way. I think too often leaders get worried too much about those that might abuse the system, and they're very small, and not pay enough attention to those who are excelling and really doing great, great work. That's just a personal observation, and based on a 40-year career. I'm wondering, Barb, if you just might respond to this question that I have. And it dawned on me as I was going through your document, we are seeing more and more offices becoming remote. And it's harder to develop a culture when you can't see the beliefs, values, and attitudes actually being seen day to day, those sort of things. Does it mean compassion can't be delivered virtually as well through decisions and actions and virtual discussions? But does this bring a new variable in your mind, the remote office?
Yeah, thanks for that. It absolutely does. And that's where the intentionality comes in. If you don't know people, you don't see suffering. And therefore, it's easy to not, pay attention to that. And the mission, vision, values, that's a great example of something that has to be evidenced in every aspect of an organization, not just the plaque on the wall. So hiring practices, orientation, recruitment, all of it. So it absolutely brings an element, which is why in my sociodemographic question, I did ask how much of staff, works from home versus in the office. I will say in nonprofits, workers are often not in the office anyway, right? They're out in the field. They're under the bridges working with people who are underhoused, and so in some ways it's not as new to them in many nonprofits as it is to the business world, but it absolutely does, and that was actually another suggestion for future research is how did the pandemic and the work from home outcome of that, how does that impact the possibility for networks to flourish, which is key to systemic compassion flourishing.
Yeah, and maybe leaders have to work a little harder at it in terms of digging a little deeper and to really get to know their colleagues and to work with them and build that relationship so people are free to share this and they have the psychological safety that Amy Edmondson talks about. Yeah, great. Okay, I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Dr. Dikovic, do you have some follow-up question? Or? Okay. Are there some questions from the audience? Because this is the public defense, and it's allowed to have questions from the audience as well.
Well, I'm only going to do this because Barb's my sister.
Okay.
May I?
Yeah. Yes, please.
As a matter of introduction, my name is Randy Leavitt. Barb is my sister, my very proud big brother today. So Barb, I want to follow up on a question that Dr. Dikovich asked, and that was, are there any circumstances that you uncovered or learned about where systemic compassion wouldn't be a good thing in the workplace?
No. It can be very hard, but there are no, the only downside is the over-compassionate, which might end up being an excuse for poor performance or poor staff behavior. And this goes back to Dr. Weiss's point too, around, that what comes with compassion is accountability. You need strength in management to root out toxicity and not create unfairness for other workers. So there is never not a place for appropriate compassion that is linked with accountability and some other pieces of the findings.
So even in acute circumstances of crisis,
especially then, because I certainly in my life, as I'm sure you have too, have had to fire people and terminate and all that. You can do that with compassion. That is the integration of accountability with compassion. So I think that it might look a little differently depending on context, but there's never not a reason to do things well to reduce the suffering of others.
Okay, thank you. Good answer.
Okay. Yes, I will now. Professor Agba, do you maybe want to ask a question? But your microphone is turned off.
Okay, I'd like to congratulate Babs. I am really amazed by the level of knowledge you've gathered and expertise you have gained in the course of conducting this study. Yeah, I think you should be a consultant. Yeah, you should be called a consultant in the area of systematic compassionate leadership. Yeah, so at the moment, I have a few questions I would like to ask you. Are there moments in the field data that you gathered or in the field work where compassionate leadership significantly impacted team success? Did you discover one or two areas in the course of interacting with the chief executives?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's it. That's good. I'm trying to think of specific examples. What I will say is that all CEOs spoke of the need to invest in the leadership team so that it was one of the tools to carry through. So, and the positive outcomes of that, it was interesting because CEOs couldn't, when I would ask, what does compassion look like, feel like, how do you know it's present in a workplace? Many couldn't describe. They would say, well, you just feel it, you just know it. But many could also say, it improved, relationships, which improves productivity, and it's a mitigator for interpersonal conflict and those sorts of things. So, I'm not thinking of any specific examples where where any of the leaders shared a specific success, for example. Darn, I bet I will think of it in about an hour.
Yeah, okay, thank you. That is fine. And secondly, I like to find out, I know Professor Jim highlighted the fact that compassionate leadership can be abused, though just by a little number, which might be insignificant. But what role does compassionate leadership play in addressing discrimination in the workplace? Did you
Well,
get
the
my
role-
question? Yeah.
I'll begin to answer, and if I'm off track, please let me know and I'll retry. The role it plays is to reduce and to suss out any systemic discrimination. So its potential is to improve well-being of all staff, including those who have experienced or are experiencing that. I'm not sure, Professor Agba, if that gets at what you were referring to.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm asking what potential lies in deploying compassionate leadership to address discrimination in the workplace?
Yeah, the potential is huge, because if the goal of a compassionate leader and a compassionate workplace is to reduce the suffering, then to do that, you have to notice suffering, you have to have empathy for it, and you have to take action. And so, to me, the value and potential is in the action to reduce suffering, an example of which may be systemic discrimination or individual discrimination.
Okay, thank you. That is all.
Okay, I think this is all,
Yeah.
and then we can go to the deliberation session. Hello to everybody. Jim, are you there?
I am.
Dr. Dikovic, are you there? Okay. So we have made a decision. Of course, this is for our standpoint, and our decision is this, that Barbara's dissertation is deserved unconditional pass. And we will say also, in terms of our terminology of our institution, it's summa cum laude. So it's the highest grade that we as a school provide for the dissertation. So congratulations, Barbara.
Congratulations, Barb.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Yeah, congratulations, Barb. Proud of you.
It was
Thank
an
you
easy
so
decision,
much.
Barbara. It was an easy decision. So that's why we jump quickly to this meeting back. So I know that your dream has been now fulfilled, and that there is one additional PhD in your family, and that's you. So I'm really proud of you, and I'm really proud of what we have done together. Also, I would like to thank Jim for great collaboration and knowledge and expertise and comments and everything. I learned a lot from you, Jim, as well. Thank you.
Likewise, thank you.
And Barb, it was really a pleasure working with you for all of these years, not only for the dissertation, even previously when we did our courses. So enjoy. This is your moment. You should celebrate it with your family. It's a great achievement. Thank you very much.
And congratulations, Dr. Leavitt.
Thank you so much.
And Barbara, let's get formal for a second. Dr. Leavitt from now on, if we may. Thank you so much. We're immensely proud, and also thank you for giving us the chance of having the challenge to work with you on this topic. It's just, I can only speak in the highest tone and words. And I hope we also met your expectations, as you by far exceeded ours. And I hope you enjoyed the experience. You had a great journey. And finally, always keep in mind we are a family, and you're part of the SMC family. We hope to be part of yours as well. and yeah, be proud of what you achieved. We are, and Dr. Leavitt, all the best, and thank you so much.
Dr. Leavitt.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, so much. I am overwhelmed. So thank you.
It was really a pleasure, and some of our comments will be sent to you from Jim and from Dr. Dikovic. I'm always standing at your disposal for further working with you on this. So we are continuing our work.
Thank you
we're just
so
looking
much.
forward to seeing your dissertation as a book.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well,
That's a new challenge for you, Dr. Leavitt.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, very good.
And thank you for the experience. I have nothing but high praise for the sort of academic, excellence, because, both Alexander and Jim, pushed and challenged. This was not, I had a lot of learning to do, and I just appreciate the gentle way that those challenges came. And so thank you so much to SMC as well.
Thank you as well.
Thank you.
And enjoy. And Michael,
Celebrate, Barb. Great accomplishment.
Great,
you so much.
Dr. Leavitt. Great.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow, thank you.
And cheers.
And cheers. Thank you.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Enjoy.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.